On behalf of the Department of History, Rabindra Bharati University, and Voices from Periphery, a special lecture has been arranged, and I welcome Professor Amiya P to deliver this special lecture in the Department of History, Rabindra Bharati University. I would like to welcome Professor Shen to the dais. Sir,
Same age.
Dr. Krishna Mondol, Professor Shenke ফুল দিয়ে বরণ করবেন। A small introduction about Professor Amiya P. Dr. Amiya P. a luminary in the intellectual and cultural history of modern India, stands as a beacon and grace in the realm of historical scholarship. Dr. Sen currently graces the academic world as Sivadasani Fellow at the Oxford Centre for Hindu Studies, Oxford, UK, a role that underscores his global repute. His past appointments include Hendrik Zimmer Chair at the South Asian Institute, Heidelberg University, and Agatha Harrison Fellowship at the University of Oxford, each an illustrious chapter. He has also been a visiting fellow at the Indian Institute of Advanced Studies, Simla, and the Center for Contemporary Study, Nehru Memorial Museum and Library, New Delhi. His short journey in the civil service and his return again to the academic, his tenure as a professor at Jamia Millia Islamia Delhi and as a Tagore professor at the Rabindra Bharati Shantiniketan further cemented his position as one of the leading voices in modern Indian historiography. To hear Professor Shen is transported into the world of academy. It is a privilege that leaves one enriched and inspired. Thank you.
Good afternoon everyone. তো আমি আয়ুষ বর্তমানে নর্থ ইস্টার্ন হিল ইউনিভার্সিটি মেডিকেল ইন্ডিয়ায় মাস্টার্স করছি। ভয়েসেস ফ্রম দ্য পেরিফেরি আমাদের একটি স্টুডেন্ট অর্গানাইজেশন, সেখানে নর্থ ইস্টার্ন হিল ইউনিভার্সিটি, ইস্টার্ন ফরেন ল্যাঙ্গুয়েজ ইউনিভার্সিটি, রবীন্দ্র ভারতী ইউনিভার্সিটি, প্রেসিডেন্সি ইউনিভার্সিটি থেকে আমাদেরই মতো যারা মাস্টার্স করছে তাদের আমাদেরই বন্ধু বান্ধবরা সব রয়েছে, তাদের সাথে একটি অর্গানাইজেশন। আমাদের মূল লক্ষ্য হচ্ছে বিভিন্ন ধরনের অনলাইন এবং অফলাইন লেকচার আয়োজন করা, এবং আমরা বছরে দুটো জার্নাল বার করি, টেলস অফ দ্য মার্জিনালস নামে। তো আমাদের এই শর্ট ইন্ট্রোডাকশনের সাথে আমরা স্যারকে আমি অনুরোধ করবো তিতলি এবং রাখিকে স্যারকে একটু বরণ করে নেওয়ার জন্য আমাদের তরফ থেকে। থ্যাংক ইউ এভরিওয়ান। তো এরপরে আমি রিকোয়েস্ট করবো স্যারকে
ল্যাম্পটা একটু সাইড করে দেবেন, আমাদের ক্যামেরাতে মুখটাই বেড়ে যাচ্ছে। আচ্ছা, ওটা না, ওটা না, ওটা না, ওটা না, ওটা না, ওটা না। ঘুরিয়ে দে, ঘুরিয়ে দে, লাইটটা ছটা পড়ছে ওইদিকে দে, যেমন ছিল তেমনই রাখ। ওটা সাদাটা একটু এদিকে করে দে, সাদাটা, সাদাটা একটু। থাক, ওখানে রাখ, হ্যাঁ ওখানে রাখ।
এই মাইকটা একটু এই সাইড
নামিয়ে দে।
হ্যাঁ আপনারা বলবেন দূরত্ব বাড়াতে হয় যত বাড়াতে হয়।
ঠিক আছে।
আচ্ছা, থ্যাংক ইউ অল ফর কামিং। আমার বাংলা মোটামুটি ভালো, কিন্তু বাংলায় বলার অভ্যেস নেই, অথবা ওই পুরনো ব্রাহ্মণ রেকর্ডের মতন ইংরেজিটা আটকে যেতে পারে, সেই জন্য রিস্ক নিচ্ছি না। ইংরেজিতেই বলবো, সরল ইংরেজিতে বলবো, নিশ্চয়ই বুঝতে পারবেন আপনারা। আর কোয়েশ্চেন আনসার সেশনে অবশ্যই বাংলা বলতে পারেন, আমার কোনো অসুবিধা নেই বুঝতে। আমি বাংলা না জানলে হয়তো রিসার্চই করতে পারতাম না। যদিও বলে রাখি, আমি জীবনে স্কুল বা কলেজে কোনোদিন বাংলা পড়িনি, তো এন্টায়ারলি সেলফ টট, এবং তার একটা লিমিটেশন থাকবেই। আপনাদের মতো উচ্চাঙ্গিক বাংলা আমি বলতে পারবো না, হয়তো লিখতে পারবো না, কিন্তু মোটামুটি বুঝি। আচ্ছা, আজকের বিষয়টা সম্বন্ধে বলি। রিফর্ম হিন্দুইজম, ইটস ফিলোসফিক্যাল, social and political foundations. I ask four fundamental questions about the theme. But before that, I want to make some general comments about history reading, history writing, and history understanding. First of all, my advice to you, after having taught for about 35-40 years, my advice to you is not to be syllabus bound. Syllabus, curriculum, examinations are like a box which entrap you. They don't let you think outside the box. You must begin by thinking outside the box. I do concede that the examination system and syllabi have to be changing all the time. You know, in Western universities, as I've seen, teachers have the freedom to frame their own syllabus, and it keeps changing every semester. It's entirely free. The university does not intervene. I wish that was possible here too, because that will open up a lot more possibility than is possible today. But the point that I'm driving at is that please take history not as a vocational subject. I mean, it's not something which will fetch you a job somewhere someday. Don't look at it as vocational subject. Look at it as an intellectual subject, something which enlightens you, something which promotes your understanding of the world, of society, of people. You see, in the early 19th century in Bengal, since you're all Bengalis and we are in Bengal, let me quote the example of young Bengal. You see, young Bengal did not take to the study of English language because it fetched them jobs. If you look at their class origin, they did not need jobs actually. Most of them were from very affluent or rather affluent middle class families. They were not there for jobs. They were there for learning and opening their minds to what was happening globally. You see, when Raman Roy was working with John Digby, who was an East India Company official, he used to regularly read, whenever available, English newspapers. Not because he wanted to learn the English language. That was also a function, surely. But more than that, he was interested in knowing what was happening around the world. And that is how, from a very early age, Raman was drawn to the idea of visiting the West. Luckily, he also got this commission from Akbar II, as you know, and he was sent to fight the case for his pension. But even that, outside, Raman was very keen to go abroad and see the world for himself. So please see history as an intellectual discipline, first and foremost. It may or may not get you a job, and if you concede that, then let me come to my next point. I think, from my experience again, let me say, there are two ways of looking at history, broadly two ways. One is what I call a rooftop view, seeing history from a height. And the other is what I call a tourist view. Now, what is the difference? A tourist view is a view where, like a tourist, you visit each site and examine the site carefully, in very great detail. You appreciate the color, the texture, the history, the ecology, etc., etc. But you cannot relate that particular site to the rest of the environment. From a rooftop view, you look at the entire landscape. Suppose you are standing on the top of a very high building. You can see the entire city for yourself. And you can see how the city can be sociologically divided. Where are the rich people staying? Where are the poor people staying? What are the ecological features of that landscape? Which you cannot get from the tourist view of history. So this relational kind of approach, relating one to the other, is a very important thing. And what I am about to do today is not to give you a history of reform in India, which you already know from your textbooks. What I am about to do today and say today is not something you will find in your textbooks. My idea here is not to repeat what textbooks say, but raise a very new set of questions and make you think about these questions. These are very general macro questions, large questions, philosophical questions, which again you will see is outside the syllabus. I mean, learning all this will not help you in securing greater marks, more marks. I do admit that passing an examination well is also important. But don't stop there, go beyond that. That's my humble submission. So having said this twin bifurcation about ways of looking at history, let me now plunge into what I am about to say. As I said, I asked four cardinal important questions. Number one, what is Reform Hinduism? How do we define it? Number two, why do we study Hinduism at all? Why do we study Reform Hinduism in particular? Third, what was new about this Hinduism? As I shall explain, the word reform and the word Hinduism are both new. And let me elaborate on that a little later. But this is important. There was something very astounding, unique, new, modern about this Hinduism. This is not the Hinduism of the Vedas, by the way. And in the age of the Vedas, there was no Hinduism as such. I'll explain that a little later. So, it's important to realize what the newness is about this Reform Hinduism that we are talking about. Fourthly, very briefly, because this is a subject by itself, and maybe some other day I can come and talk to you about this. What is the relationship, if any, between Hinduism and Hindutva? Are they the same? Does one take off from the other? If they are related, how intimately are they related? If not, why not? So this is a very contemporary question in the light of what is happening in the last 10, 15, 20 years. And there's a huge debate building up now, examining this, precisely examining the relationship between Hinduism and Hindutva. Do they complement each other, or are they very different also at times? So, as I said, I can't touch upon this question in great detail because it's a whole new lecture by itself, but I'll briefly touch upon it at the end of the talk. Now, my first question, what is Reform Hinduism? Please note, as I just said 2 minutes back, The words reform and Hinduism are both new. Why do I say that? The word Hinduism first occurred only in the 1780s, and it was used first by East India Company officials. He was an important official of the East India Company who used the word Hinduism. So he was probably the first to use that term. The first Indian to use the term Hinduism was Ram Mohan Roy in 1816. Now, the interesting question here is that the word Hinduism is not as old as the word Hindu. Definitely not. The word Hindu is far, far older. It used to be existing in the times of Darius, the Persians, the ancient Persians and the ancient Greeks, who, as you know, named the eastern banks of the Indus as Hindu, the place where the Hindus reside, and that's also because of a linguistic flaw, because in ancient Persian, you do not have the pronunciation S, so that S is replaced by H, and so Sindhu became Hindu. Everyone knows that, more or less everyone knows that. But the more interesting question here is that the history of Hinduism is not more than 250 years old. What does that tell us? It tells us that Hinduism is perhaps one of the youngest religions of the world, in a sense. Not in every sense, but in a sense. Because all other major religions are much older. Take Islam, take Christianity, take Judaism, take Confucianism. The other point to be noted here is this suffix ism with Hinduism is something peculiar to the Western world. The words Buddhism, Sikhism, Hinduism, Taoism, Confucianism are all given by the Western world to these cultures, with one solitary exception, and that is Islam. There is no ism after Islam, please note. Islam is the only exception. All these words, starting from Hinduism down to Confucianism, end with the suffix ism, and this was given originally by Western people, not by local people. Take reform, take the word reform. First of all, there is no equivalent of the word reform in Indian languages in the pre-modern world, not as far as I know. That is, you take Marathi, Bangla, Hindi, you will not find something which is equivalent to the word reform and its meaning in English to exist before the 19th century. It began to be used widely only in and after the 19th century. So there's something new about the word reform, which we must understand. The interesting thing here is, if reform means improving certain things, as we all understand it, this act of improvement, or the intention to improve, existed long back. It was there in the age of Buddha, it was there in the age of Nanak, Chaitanya, whoever. But interestingly again, the contemporaries of Nanak, the Buddha, Chaitanya did not call them reformers. You will never find such a reference in biographies or works on them. They are not called reformers. They are either understood as saints, great souls, teachers, philosophers, enlightened people, and so on. They are not called reformers by any stroke of imagination. And their work also is not called reform. Though you might say that, look, the Buddha rebelled against Vedic Hinduism. He was trying to reform something. He tried to prohibit animal sacrifice. That's also reforming something. And yet, they are not called reformers. So the point that I'm making here is that reform is a very modern term which came into vogue only in and after the 19th century. And we have not taken it for granted that this must have existed long back. That's not the case. There's something very new and contemporary about the word reform. What does the use of the word Hinduism also suggest to you? It suggests that Hinduism is uniformly the religion of all Hindus. So if the Hindus practice a religion, it must be Hinduism. And behind that label is the understanding that all Hindus share the same ideas and practices regarding their religion, which is historically absolutely false. You know, in the 1870s, when British started the census operations for the first
জল
the Hindus did not quite know what to call themselves. They would generally call themselves either Vaishnavas or Shaktas or Ganapatyas or Shaivas. There was no common understanding which put together all Hindus into a common faith or religion. That a community, and please listen to this carefully, that a certain community must all share the same belief system and must practice the same things is a Western notion. Which is why Dharma and religion are not the same. Dharma doesn't really mean religion. It means something else. And do you know who was the first person to try and equate two? None other than Vivekananda in the 1880s. He translates Dharma as religion, which historically is not tenable, which cannot be supported. Dharma is far more complex than the word religion. First of all, Dharma does not believe that everybody, all members in a community must share the same belief. There are various kinds of Dharma. There is something called the Sri Dharma, which is peculiar to women. There is something called the Apat Dharma, Dharma in a crisis. The Dharma also differs according to caste. It's the Dharma of the Kshatriya to fight, the Dharma of the Brahmin to teach. They are not the same. So Dharma is contingent and it keeps changing from class, category, time, space, etc. There is nothing universal about Dharma in that sense. It's specific. Religion, on the other hand, makes us believe that there is a common faith running through all members of a religious community, which, as I am trying to tell you, is a purely Western concept, which came into India and became acceptable to Hindus for many reasons which we will go into a little later. My second question about why study Hinduism? Why study Reform Hinduism? Oh, another thing. Apart from suggesting that the word Hinduism covers all Hindus and they all think alike, it also suggests that they are a coherent, unified community, which again is historically not tenable. Anyone who is sound on medieval history here, or even early medieval history here, will recall that in South India, Vaishnavas and Shaivas fought each other endlessly. In Bengal, Shaktas and Vaishnavas fought each other. In Kumbh Mela, which occurs every 12 years, there was a massive fight among Hindus on the issue of who will take the first dip in the Ganges. Somewhere in the 19th century, I can't remember the exact date, thousands of people were massacred on this question. Because one party said, we will take the dip first, the other party said, no, we will take the dip first. So, a sense of a unified community among Hindus is something which only the right-wing Hindus now try to promote. It was never there historically. Okay, why do we study Reform Hinduism? I think for 2 or 3 important reasons. Number one, Reform Hinduism, and please bear in mind this is important, Reform Hinduism is the very opposite or opposed to the idea of Sanatana Dharma, which, as you know, is a very favorite cry for the right-wing intellectuals and right-wing workers in India today. They say the Hindus follow Sanatana Dharma. Now, what does the word Sanatana mean? It means something which is timeless, changeless, eternal. Reform Hinduism, on the other hand, suggests the very opposite. It is the historical view of Hinduism, which says that like every other religion, Hinduism also evolves and changes. So the question of an eternal religion, unchanging, timeless religion, is completely absurd as far as history is concerned. And if you call Hinduism Reform Hinduism, it implies that this Hinduism is subject to change, it's subject to reform. And if something can be reformed, how can it be eternal? So there is a contradiction there, which is why I said Reform Hinduism tends to oppose the very idea of Sanatana Dharma. Secondly, the historical view of Hinduism makes us aware of the fact that historically Hinduism has changed such a great deal, and especially in the last 300 or 400 years, which perhaps no other religion has changed. And let me give you an example. If as Hindus we believe that our religion is founded in the Vedas, everyone says that, we are ending up in a very absurd situation because of two reasons. Number one, the fact of reality is that 99% of Indians don't know what the Vedas say. So how can the Vedas be the scripture for all Hindus? It was remember, the Vedas are in a Sanskrit which is not classical Sanskrit. It's not the Sanskrit of Kalidas. It's archaic, very old kind of Sanskrit. And very few people can decipher and understand Vedic hymns if you really deconstruct these hymns in old Sanskrit. So for a people who can't understand the whole scripture, how can the Vedas be their scripture? It's not possible in Islam. It's not possible in Christianity. In Christianity, Luther translated the Bible from Latin into German so that people can read, everyone can read and understand what the Bible says. The Vedas have not been translated in that sense. The translation of Vedas is only for academic purposes, not for religious purposes. So there is a great difference there. Number two, contemporary Hinduism, the Hinduism of today, has very little connection with the religion of the Vedas. Tell me the name of one temple in India which is dedicated to Indra or Varuna today. None. As far as I know, there is only one temple dedicated to even Brahma, that is in Pushkar. Secondly, Vedic religion shows no signs of temple worship. There was no temple worship. There are no temples in the Vedic age. Number three, there were no idols, murtis in the Vedic age. So how is contemporary Hinduism related to the Vedic Hinduism? The bottom line here is that Hinduism has been changing. And as I said, it changed a hell of a lot in the last 300 to 400 years. Primarily as a result of a very creative and a very significant contact with the Western world. I will bring up this question a little later as to why the Islamic civilization did not change us so much as the Western civilization did. After all, they also ruled for 5 to 6 centuries. And they carried a lot of wisdom. The Arabs were wonderfully either in sciences and crafts. We don't know that, but usually it is admitted that the medieval Arabs were completely conversant with the science and technology of their age. But none of this is reflected in India today. But let me come to that question a little later. The more important thing to remember here is that contemporary Hinduism has really no base in Vedic Hinduism. Which again comes back to my whole point that Hinduism has been evolving and will evolve over time. What are the new notions that begin to come into Hinduism from the early 19th or late 18th, early 19th centuries? I tried to sort of pinpoint some which are the most important. First of all, there is a growing notion of a different conception of time and history. Please understand this point because it's not a very simple point to understand. The typical Hindu concept of time is cyclical. Yugas, one yuga follows the other. Satya, Treta, Dwapar, Kali. And then it goes back to Satya. So this is a circular movement in time. Cyclical. Now please remember, history cannot have a cyclical movement in time. Because in history we admit that every movement is unique. Things change. So if we return back to Satya Yuga after Kali, what is the change? We are following an endless cycle of pros and cons. History as a discipline and understanding history as a way of understanding the world evolved in India after the Hindus admitted the fact that time must be taken to be linear. What does the word linear mean? In a line, in a straight line, going from there to there. Unless time is linear, history doesn't make any sense. So we have, from the 19th century onwards, a new notion of time and history. Let me ask you another valid question. Why is it that the most important of our books, scriptures, works have no authors? Even today we don't know who the author of the Gita was or the author of the Vedas was. And how is it that Veda Vyas is the author of 18 Mahapuranas? I don't think it's humanly possible to write 18 Mahapuranas by a single person. No one knows who Veda Vyas was. No one knows who the author of the Gita was. Why did this occur? It occurs because of one basic concept underlying Hinduism, that there is nothing unique in time. Everything follows from what preceded it, which is why authors would generally tend to think what they are saying is actually a modification of what has been said before. They are not saying anything new. This discouraged them from asserting their authorship. Writing of books with authorships, establishing individual authorships, is a 19th century phenomenon. It did not occur, with rare exceptions. Of course, there is Kalhan's Rajtarangini, and there are other works where people have put in their names and said that he was so and so. But these are mostly literary works. They are not religious works. Very few religious works will have the name of the author given alongside. And the reason I think is this, that there was no concept of individual authorship. This began to change in the 19th century with two important developments. One, authorship became to be recognized, and two, history as a discipline evolved over time. Third, and I would add, from the 19th century we have a prolific understanding, a prolific increase in the genre of biography writing. Every biography from the 19th century onwards gives his or her name. It's important for him or her to establish who he is or who she is. This is a unique phenomenon as far as Hinduism is concerned. Second, new notions of modernity. Broadly, there can be two notions of modernity. One is related to time, chronology. What follows from yesterday must be modern. That's one kind of understanding. So as we advance in time, we are advancing towards modernity. The other is a conceptual understanding of modernity, which is not necessarily based on chronology. Ram Mohan understood this very well. His modernity was based more on the concept of modernity than on time. He saw the relationship between various things, which was a very modern way of looking at things. Modernity, in his understanding, was a way of looking at things. I'll give you an example to illustrate this. Ram Mohan, in a letter to an English friend, says, religion is fine, provided, and I'm quoting him literally, religion is fine, but it must secure for us political advantage and social comfort. Now, please tell me if in the whole history of Hinduism, any Hindu writer has tried to relate religion with political advantage and social comfort. So why is Ram Mohan doing it? As a modern man, Ram Mohan sees the relationship between politics, religion and society. For him, society and religion cannot be separated. For him, politics and religion cannot be separated. Please remember that even Gandhi believed that. Gandhi was not someone strictly secular who would say that no, you cannot mix up religion and politics. All his life, he believed that religion and politics are intertwined, interconnected. And I see a continuity here between Ram Mohan, who's really the first man in modern India, and Gandhi, who was one of the last. So, this is an important development which we must try to understand. This notion of what modernity itself is all about. It's not simply about a situation in time. It's also about looking at things in a certain way. My next point is about new ideological currents. I am pretty sure that this is not something which any of your textbooks mention or bring up. But today I'll talk very briefly about one very influential and significant movement which originated in Europe in the 17th century and came to India by the late 18th and early 19th century. And this movement is called Deism. Please note the spelling, D-E-I-S-M, Deism. Now, what does Deism say? It says something very interesting. Deism says that having created the world, and they concede that God created the world, which means that they are theists, they're not atheists, they're not Gnostics. So God created the world, after which God stopped intervening in it. God passed the responsibility of running the world on man. So man became ethically and otherwise responsible for running this world well, for the benefit of everyone. There was an English deist thinker called William Paley, P-A-L-E-Y, who said something very interesting, and I want to narrate this before you to illustrate my point. Paley said, look, it's like saying the following. After the watchmaker has made the watch, he doesn't bother about it anymore. Why? The person now responsible for taking care of the watch is the watch wearer, the person who buys the watch and wears it. The watchmaker is no longer involved. So, similarly, God created the world for man's benefit, but having created the world, he passed on the responsibility to man himself. Now, what does this mean? What are the implications of this argument. The implications are very profound and significant. They are, number one, that man has a moral agency. Man has a moral responsibility of running the world. He cannot trust God alone with it. He is equally involved with what goes on in the world. Now, if man has a moral agency, moral responsibility, he becomes, and I want to stress and underline these words here, he becomes a self-conscious actor, a self-conscious interventionist in the everyday running of the world. If he doesn't intervene, the world will not function well. I think in this argument lies the very essence of reform. So far I have been leading you to this argument, that unless man self-consciously intervenes for the betterment of the world, the world cannot be a better place. It cannot be left to God alone. Man has a responsibility. So this argument is very crucial to understand the whole philosophy of reform. I can name at least 2 or 3 Indians, Bengalis rather, who were very staunch deists. Beginning with Ramon, the other person was Okratuma Datto, and third, Vidyashankar. They were all deists in their own belief, who believed in the importance of human intervention. As you know, Vidyashankar was merely an agnostic, or even an atheist perhaps. Some people believe he was an atheist. But that apart, all the 3 believed that man is the measure of such things. My next point, 4th or 5th, I can remember, the increasing importance attached to humanism. Now please let me know if you have any ideas. Can you distinguish humanism from humanitarianism? I know that in Bangla it's difficult to differentiate. I don't think there are 2 words for it. Manavatavad is common to both. But in English, humanism and humanitarianism are different. So can anyone let me know what the difference is? Okay. If not, then I'm trying to make this point here, which I hope you'll understand, and sort of incorporate this into your understanding of 19th century history. Humanism, as opposed to humanitarianism, is not sympathy for common man, for fellow man. It is a philosophy or an idea which believes that everything must be man-centered. Man has to be the measure of everything. You cannot judge anything by any other criteria. As you can see, this is different from saying that, look, let me work for the poor and let me have sympathy or empathy for the poor, which is humanitarianism. And look at the Buddha's karuna. Karuna is compassion. That is humanitarianism. It's not humanism. What 19th century thinkers are saying, that following the Renaissance, mind you, those of you who know the Renaissance well will understand this, because the Renaissance is the major world movement which establishes humanism as a base of philosophy. What the humanists are saying, that man has to be the measure of everything. The universe must be man-centered. Like the sun is the center of the solar system, man has to be the center of everything around him. From this comes the other important criteria of utility, Hituvada. If humanism is about concern for man, things must be utilitarian. They must be useful, otherwise they are of no value. Those of you who know a little bit about Bunkin will know how great and admired he was of John Stuart Mill. who was a great thinker in the utilitarian tradition. So, humanism and utilitarianism are two cardinal principles of 19th century Western thought as accepted by Hindus. From the 19th century onwards, you cannot really think of any Hindu thinker who doesn't give enough importance to these two criteria in their writings, in their speeches, or anything else. A related question which I hinted at, how much time do I have left? I hope I don't exceed my time.
40 minutes have lost.
Sorry? Okay. An important question which I hinted at some time back is why is it that Middle Eastern civilizations fail to impact the Hindu mind as much as English and the Western civilization did? I don't think any textbook recommended by Calcutta University raises this question, or for that matter any university in India. But it's an important question. In fact, the Indo-Islamic rule over India is longer than the British rule. Surely. And yet, we don't witness a similar awakening, a similar renaissance in thought in India as we do in the 19th century. I thought about this hard and I tried to contrast the very different impact which Persian Arabic on the one hand and English language on the other made to the Hindu mind. Please remember, and I'm generalizing, there is no time for getting into details here, but I hope you understand the gravity of this point. In medieval India, under Indo-Islamic rule, Arabic was never the language of science, which it ought to have been had the Arabs ruled India. Anyone who knows enough about Middle Eastern history will know how progressive Arab science was. And yet, none of this came to India. Neither Arab medicine, nor Arab science, nor astronomy. Persian, on the other hand, was a language of vocation, was a language of profession. I mean, among Hindus, the caste which took to Persian learning and using Persian professionally were Kayasthas. In North India and in Bengal, these were the people who took in a big way to learning Persian because they were the people in charge of revenue offices. And in revenue work, you needed knowledge of Persian. So the reason why Hindus took to learning Persian was because of a purely professional reason. What I'm trying to say is that neither Arabic nor Persian proved to be an intellectual language, which English was. This is an important point. Did you know that in the early 19th century, young Bengal was willing to pay 5 times the publishing price of a book by Thomas Paine, which is on the Revolution, called The Age of Reason. If the price of the book was 1 rupee, they paid or were willing to pay 5 rupees for that book because they wanted to read what it says. Again, they are not anxious to secure a vocation or a profession. They were interested in knowing what these people are saying, what new things they are saying. So this is a matter of a great mental revolution. Please also remember, and this I want to leave with you to mull over and think about it. I think 19th century Bengal created the first modern intelligentsia in the whole of Asia, before both Japan and China. They were the first modern intelligentsia. And there was virtually a mental revolution in 19th century, comparable to the Meiji Restoration in late 19th century Japan. We were modern in a sense much before the Japanese were, or even the Chinese. So we can come to expect certain new things and significant things emerging from this mental revolution that occurred because of the impact of the West through the English language. Few quick words about social reformism in practice. So far I've been talking about theory. There are interesting things to be said about social reformism in practice also. And this again is not something you find in your books. So if you're interested, please make a note of these. I think social reform can be divided into two models, the way it was carried out, implemented. One of them I call the Bengal model, and the other one I call the Madras and Bombay model. What was the Bengal model? Number one, the Bengal model specialized in women-related issues, never caste. Caste is a very unimportant factor in the Bengal Renaissance. Caste-related issues occurred much later. It was never as important as it was in either Bombay or Madras presidencies. We were completely absorbed in the so-called women question. Why? That's for you to research and find out. Why not caste and why only women? Number two, the Bengal model followed the top-down model, which is to say, that it was conducted mostly by upper caste people, almost invariably. Why mostly? I can't think of a lower caste people. Take Brahmo Samaj downwards, any reformer is either a Brahmin or a Buddha or a Kayastha. I can't think of any other intervening caste involved in it. So it's a system by which the upper caste sets an example for the lower caste or intermediary caste to follow. It's a top-down model. It's also a regulated model, which is to say that, look, don't go out of bounds, stay within bounds. We've drawn a Lakshman Rekha, try and stay within it. If you do not do this, we'll run into trouble. That's in general the Bengal model. I call this regulated reform, principally because it tended to follow Shastras in reform in society. Start from Brahmo down again to Vidyashagar, they are all advocates of Shastra-related change, not logic-related change. They are not going by logic, they are going by Shastra, the sanctity of Shastra. In Bombay and Madras, on the other hand, significantly, there was both top-down model and upwards model. There were radical challenges set against upper class hegemony in Bombay and Madras by lower caste people. Take Phule in Maharashtra. Take Periyar in South India. Take Ambedkar a little later. They are all lower caste movements challenging the upper caste dominance. Something like this never happened in the world. There is no equivalent to Phule in all of Bengal throughout the 19th, not even the 20th. So this is something worth noting, that not only is caste important here, there are alternative routes taken by lower caste as against the upper caste one. Another difference which I think is important, the Bengal model tended to rely much more in fact, on religious reform than social reform. This is interesting because as historians, it's difficult for us to separate religion and society. Religion is a reflection of society, and society follows from religion. It's vitally shaped by religion. But name me one important social reformer from Bengal who really attacks social issues. Ramu is known, actually, he was much more radical in his religious reform than in social reform. The man never gave up the sacred thread, even on his deathbed. He continued wearing the sacred thread as a Brahmin till his last day. He never wrote about caste oppression. This is not something which you witness elsewhere in India. So, a point to be noted again here is that the Bengal model had certain distinctiveness. In fact, Granade, who was the creator of the social conference, would complain against Keshav Sen, saying that why is Keshav Babu obsessed with religious reform and Brahmanism? Why doesn't he do something about women? If you read a standard biography of Keshav, you'll see that Keshav in his later life was far more orthodox about women as he was in his early life. Much more orthodox. He went back on his women-related reform. As you know, he violated his own norms in the Kuch Vihar marriage controversy, getting his daughter married to a prince when she was not of the age that was stipulated. So, that distinction is important. Maharashtra and Madras were far more honed on social reform issues, not religious. One last bit that I linked, that I don't think there's much more time here. Even within women-related reform, and those of you who sort of want to research on these questions, here is some food for thought. Even women-related reform in Bengal, admitting that women was the principal target here, was highly selective. By which I mean that reformers would take up only issues that were acceptable to them, not all issues. For example, let me begin by quoting this example. Ram Mohan helped considerably in stopping the practice of sati, right? A very noble deed, I think. But why doesn't Ram Mohan also think of widow remarriage? He never did. There is not a single line which he writes in support of widow remarriage. On the contrary, he cites the Gita, saying that brahmacharya is the best for widows. So my question here is, if you are rescuing helpless widows from the funeral pyre, from the chitta, why can't you think of some alternative that they can exercise? I'm sure not all widows will want to marry, but at least give them a choice. Ramun doesn't do that. Number two, there is no reformer in India, certainly not in Bengal, who thinks about the issue of female infanticide, which was rampant in many parts of India. In fact, anthropologists have identified certain castes which consistently practice the killing of female children. Because of reasons that you all know, it's related to patriarchy, so on and so forth. No Indian reformer took up this issue. It was because the British legislated against it that the practice was stopped. You can't think of any Indian reformer who fought up this issue. Third, among widows, why especially advocate the case of child widows and not adult widows? You read any literature on widow remarriages, they are all consistently in support of getting child widows remarried, not adult widows. Now, I don't really see the difference. Are we saying that a woman who has been widowed at the age of 40 has no pain, no trauma? Is she not helpless? Why is the child widow more helpless than the adult widow? Now, we know why people thought about this, why people prefer the marriage of child widows and not adult widows, but it's a strange exception to make. And lastly, no one has understood this problem, but I want some of you to think about it. Why is it that Bengal, even after having started the widow remarriage movement from Vidyasagar onwards, managed to have the least number of widow marriages in all India? Do you know that the Punjab, Maharashtra, the Deccan, in Godavari Delta basically, had more widow remarriages enacted than Bengal did? Why was that so? well established. Why did Bengalis not opt to get their widows married? This is a burning research question. No one has given us the answer yet. But I include this as among the very strange exceptions that reformers are making. Lastly, again, worth thinking about, why is it that nearly all women-related reform are male-sponsored? How many women came forward to start a social reform movement? Were they not allowed? Or did they not have the independence? Of course, some women did write and think about these questions. And remember, perhaps some of you know this, we had female graduates even before England did. There were Indian female graduates present in India even before British women were graduates. Which is astonishing that despite this advancement in women's education, we failed to produce social reformers among women. So what is the case here? Is it a case of the male seizing the initiative, not allowing the woman to do so? Or is it some kind of lethargy and inconsistency or hesitation on the part of the woman? The only man, when I end on this note, the only man who believed that women can reform themselves and they ought to reform themselves without male help and support is Vivekananda.
Yes, very true.
Only man, I think. He would consistently say that let women change themselves first. Why should the man intervene? They are the sole arbiters, the sole actors who should try and change their own condition first. His logic here is that the man probably doesn't understand the woman's problem as much as the woman does. And if that is true, then the woman ought to be the best person to try and change their condition. I think I'll end there. Let me leave some time for question and answers.
Thank you, sir, for your mind-blowing lecture. স্টুডেন্টরা তোমাদের যদি কোনো প্রশ্ন থাকে স্যারের কাছে তোমরা এসে বলতে পারো সামনে। কারো কোনো প্রশ্ন আছে? I would request then Professor Patel to say a few words.
Students should come for this.
আছে কারো প্রশ্ন? হ্যাঁ এখানে এসে বলুন।
Thank you, sir, for this astonishing lecture. So, I am Ayush from Northeastern University. Sir, I have only one question about of the term Hinduism. So, in 2005, there was a book came. The title was very interesting. Was Hinduism invented? 2005. Was Hinduism invented? So, this one line. And I will help also one thinker, Rolabart. Rolabart says that each and every event has two things, like this denotation and connotation. Denotation we all see about with our eyes, but connotation is the real thing. So was there any connotation of in modern Hinduism, ISM, of it we just look at only the denotation part we are looking? What is the connotation of it?
Well, you are repeating a very old debate about the debate really was Hinduism there all the time or was it constructed? That's the word many scholars use. It's something deliberately invented, as he said, or constructed. Now, I don't think there's a very simple answer to this. Unlike many people, I don't personally think that Hinduism is 99.9% invented, which some people do. I think there are many elements of continuity within the history of Hindus which went into the making of modern Hinduism. Someone will have to research into this. It's not as if that before the coming of the British, the religion of the Hindus was vastly different from what it was in the 19th century. It certainly changed a lot since the 19th century. But there isn't a difference between, say, day and night. Respect for the Vedas continued down to the 20th century, even does today. I mean, if you look at the life and career of Dayanand Saraswati, his whole life is built upon going back to the Vedas, and Dayanand Saraswati was a late 19th century figure. Now, this is perfectly in tandem with the history of ancient India, where the Vedas were given the most importance. Well, what is the lecture here? There is no lecture. Sanskrit. Sanskrit has been a great unifier of Hindus everywhere. If I know Sanskrit in 1370, I can tour the entire India and speak to my fellow people without using English. Sanskrit was a language which every intelligent, educated person did. So Sanskrit has been a great unifier. Puranas, contemporary Hinduism, I believe, is very largely built on Puranic culture. And this is very old. The whole practice of going on pilgrimages, temple entry, rituals, they are all based on Puranas. This is not something invented in the 19th century. What was invented, and I'm going to say certain very new things here, are different ways of organizing. For instance, in pre-modern India, you could not have had, at least underlined my words, I am prepared to repeat it elsewhere also, you could not have found a sannyasi of the type that you today find in Ramakrishna Mission. No way. A sannyasi was supposed to be completely cut off from society. He was a renouncer. Today, Ramakrishna Mission sannyasis run colleges and hostels and universities, and they go about speaking English and flying on aircrafts. This is not the traditional Hindu sannyasis, by the way. So, this has changed. Ramakrishna Mission sannyasis have no scruple about food. I think I live in some Ramakrishna Mission, and we are served non-vegetarian food every day, virtually every day. This is not the diet of the traditional sannyasi. You want other examples? The very fact that we have organizations like ISKCON and the Ramakrishna Mission also suggests, and this I wanted to, in fact I forgot, I should have mentioned this, also means that Hinduism today is becoming global. It's becoming, to use a word used by Nivedita first, it's becoming aggressive. And look at the Vishwa Hindu Parishad. What does it mean? It means that Hinduism can be stationed everywhere in the world. The Ramakrishna Mission and ISKCON probably have branches in almost 80% of all countries today. If not 80, 70 surely. Now this is not something you will find in the pre-modern world. Pre-modern world was based on local culture, regional culture, not global culture. So there are very important shifts in the way we run our society and we look at religion today. Who wants to find out who the cook? You go to a wedding, do you ever ask somebody who cooked the food? This is a redundant question. If you were living 500 years earlier, why 500, even 300 years earlier, that was the first question you would have asked. Who cooked the food? Can I eat that food? Only the Brahmin can eat food, cook the food that can be eaten by everybody. No other caste. This was the practice in traditional India. Today, even if Muslims cook the food, no one bothers about these questions. Except the Sanatanis, I think. They may be very particular about such things, but the average Hindu doesn't bother about these questions. This has changed. Caste has changed. We are not so hard and fast about caste as we were, say, 200 years earlier. In fact, have you noticed how the average height of the Indian is increasing? It's because of intermarriage. Intermarriage between castes, communities, and so on. There is much more openness about such things compared to what happened 200 years ago. So, someone can write a very marvelous paper on Hinduism in transition in the last 200 to 300 years. But to come back to your question, there has been both continuity and change. A lot of things were invented in the last 200 years, but there has also been a lot of continuity. Please remember one golden rule. History is not only about change, history is also about continuities. These continuities are not always visible. You have to dig a little to find these continuities sometimes, but they exist.
Very good response. Very good.
It was wonderful to hear you. But actually, my question was when you were discussing about.
Oh, you have a question, sorry. Anyway, go on.
Actually, when you were speaking about the Bengal model of the reformation of the religion, you said that.
No, it was not just religion, but also society.
Overall,
Social and religious, both. Social and religious.
you said that there was a tendency of a Shastric interpretation and a logic. But actually.
Not logic, Shastra. More based on Shastra than pure logic. Yeah, go on.
Actually, when I was reading a book on Vishwanath Vidyasagar by Subhash Chandra Mitra, and he constantly, while writing about Vidyasagar, he gave a lot of stress on Vidyasagar being the first person who used a lot of logic over the Shastric interpretation while establishing the 101 schools or while changing the curriculum of the Sanskrit college. So,
Does it give an illustration to prove his point?
he's.
I read the book and I don't remember if he did. But have you finished? I'll answer.
Actually, he was also referring to the letters written by Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar to the governors, to the principal of the college. So,
No, I think Subhash Chandra Mitra was the first English language biographer of Vidyasagar. I know that. But I think he's mistaken. Shastras was important for two reasons. And now I'm coming into very difficult areas. It was difficult for two reasons. Number one, and please bear with this mind, again not given in your textbooks, it was important because the Brahmins dominated it. If the Brahmin had to reform society, he had to go back to the Shastras. Because he had no control over any other things. It was the Shastras only he controlled. So if Hindu society had to be interpreted by the Brahmin, which as I said was the Bengal model essentially, it had to be based on Shastras. Number one. But more importantly, the English would not listen to anything other than the Shastric logic. Why? Because they fear a rebellion. You see, I don't know if you read this book of mine on social reform. When Brahmo tried to abolish sati, he went to Bentinck and said that, look, the Shastras say that sati is not valid. So Bentinck, I am paraphrasing, Bentinck said, can you give me Praman? Can you give me proof? He said, yes. This is there in so many chapters, in so many books. Bentinck said, fine. And in that book of mine, I have included a paragraph from Bentinck's minute. It's called a minute, which is a ruling. He says that, look, I am convinced that sati is not a valid practice. I will abolish it because I know that it has the sanction of the Shastras, number one. Number two, I am pretty sure that abolishing it will not raise a rebellion in India. So the English are very clear. Shastras are no Shastras. Their self-interest comes first. Why did the English turn down Vidyasagar on the polygamy issue and not on the widow marriage issue? See, he tried two things. He tried widow marriage, which the English accepted, but he tried also to abolish polygamy, Bahuvibhav. They didn't agree to that. Why not? Because there was no Shastric sanction. It would have raised problems which the English didn't want to face. So the answer to your question is that the Shastras were important both for Indians and for the ruling authorities. But for the Shastric sanction, the debate over these issues would have been far more violent, far more contested. And I think that is the truth. I'll say one last thing to give you an example of how Vidyasagar's position was not based on logic. And this is a concrete example. As you know, people wanted to abolish polygamy and the practice of a man marrying again, please mark my words carefully, a man marrying again while his first wife was living. There are many cases. Vidyasagar furnished a whole list. Now, somebody said, Vidyasagar, why are you allowing this? He said, Shastras are saying that look, if the first wife fails to deliver a child, son or daughter, then a man is eligible to marry again. Okay? Now, this person says, if that is the case, why can't you get the man and the wife medically examined? The fault may not lie with the man at all. The fault may lie with the woman. So why don't you scientifically prove this? Vidyasagar says no. The Shastras are saying that if the wife fails to deliver a progeny, a child, then he has the right to marry. So where is the logic here? I've quoted this in my book on Vidyasagar. He categorically says that science cannot rule over Shastras.
I would like to invite Professor to say a few words.
First of all, I would like to share with you that I am a great admirer of Professor Amiya P. Not, I'm an admirer of him for last 20-30 years. And the reason is that
Let's also add for the benefit of the audience, Nitin and I frequently quarrel on these.
no, but why I like him. Okay. Now the point is why I like him. I could not understand before this lecture. Now I can really tell you why I like him, and I believe that it's our misfortune, our students' misfortune that this house is not packed today. And it should have been, because he is doing things in a way which is most beneficial for our students. You know, he is a very honest historian. Allow me to say these words. He's a very honest historian, not when he is writing about Vidyasagar, Ram Mohan Roy and other people. Even his PhD thesis is a very, very honest attempt to understand the role of religion, how things were changing and all that. I have read most of his books, not recent ones, but I can tell you that he has tried to understand what was happening in the second half of the 19th century, how the mental world of the Indian educated people, Indian intelligentsia was changing. And today he told us something very significant, that what is called modern intelligentsia emerged first in India, in entire subcontinent, continent, so to say. In Asia, yeah. So he has raised very provocative. Some of the things he said is very useful, but you can start a new research on that point. You will find that, and it is to you also, sir. Bengali films are great films. Bengali filmmakers are extraordinary. But you would find that we do not have many filmmakers like V. Shantara, where Duniya Na Mane, caste system, etc. had been given space, widow remarriage and problems of the widow. These were taken up in 1939, 40, 42. Yes, there were people who were actually doing things in a very radical way in Maharashtra. But in Bengal, what happens? With due respect, I would have to say that there were some sastric, what is called stuckness. We got stuck somewhere. And this is very remarkable that he has raised a point in response to a question that our greats decided not to violate the norms which were there in the books. I'll give you an example also. There was a meeting in Calcutta University premise or somewhere, where people were there to protest against what Dayanand Saraswati had been doing in the name of reform, and Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar presided that meeting. Professor Amiya P had asked me a question, where is your source of saying this? Once he had asked for that. I have the source because it was the meeting was held, and Vidyasagar criticized Dayanand Saraswati, in a way condemned his efforts so as to establish the fact that Shastra was to be accepted as a real one. And he raised a very pertinent question, why Britishers listened only on widow reform and not polygamy issue. Why? And here lies the crux, and here lies the main thing, that Britishers had a role in shaping the questions our intelligentsia wanted to ask or negotiate with. And in a way, the British influence is very much there. He said something about Ram Mohan Roy, and those are extraordinary questions. But I will thank him for making two observations. One is that see beyond the syllabus. See beyond the syllabus. And that is what I have been saying this, but I am not able to convince my students that syllabus is not that important. What is important is that we have to take history differently, not as a vocation, but as an intellectual exercise. And on this point, I believe that history students and researchers have a very the responsibility to reframe questions, try to find a way to negotiate with the great question of the relationship between community and the state, and social problems and political possibilities. Remarkably, he mentioned that religion is okay, but we will have to think about its political advantages. If that kind of far-sightedness was there in Ram Mohan, I should not blame the politicians of today to think about along those lines. And there is a continuity. This is very significant. And another thing which he said, that history is not all about change. History is also, in a way, an attempt to understand the continuities. And these continuities are not visible at times, you know.
And why continue?
Sorry?
Why continue?
Yes.
Why?
And that is where I think our scholars should pay more attention to Rahul Sankirtan and other scholars rather than Roland Barthes and Michel Foucault. I see a point here to mention this. A lot of students today, or a lot of researchers, very bright ones, are guided by Western scholarship in such a way that they are getting stuck in a position where from they could not see the continuities which are there in Indian history. Rahul Sankirtan is one such a scholar who has started from Vedic times India and he continued up to present time. And there is one very significant point there, that he is trying to see how Indian literature can be used to understand the continuities in Indian history. And that is why he is bringing Pali, Prakrit, Sahitya and then fusing it with the emergence of Indian literature. This is one such example. So I think we are entering into a phase where our historians have a very new kind of a job today. They must have to come up with something new, because those people who had been intelligentsia group, belong to intelligentsia, when they took power after independence, they framed a history, and the framing was so hard that we could not look properly towards what was being remembered in the popular memory and other places. Now the time has come up to face this question, how we should look back to the past and try to find why the liberal historians, one phrase I use these days, there is a phrase called fool's paradise. You understand that fool's paradise. I use provocatively liberal's paradise. They see something which is no longer acceptable to the people. And the historians today need to understand that we have to write a new kind of history. And if we do that, we will have to appreciate the efforts of historians like Amiya P. I noted down 4 or 5 pages I have noted down, and I found that most of the things he is saying had been there in our minds when we were young students, researchers in Delhi, but actually no teacher or no intellectual of that time was ready to take on these questions the way we want today to be negotiated. I mean, this is something where he comes as a different kind of historian. Nobody will talk about women-related reforms, limitation in such a candid manner. And I think we have to think out of box, which he has suggested, and for that we will have to look towards new kind of sources. Probably most important sources are going to be literary sources. This is my view, you may take it or not. But even historically, if you go back and try to find a new way of finding the continuities in Indian past, then you will find large number of other things coming up to give us some kind of an answer to the emerging questions of the time. And that is where I think these kind of lectures are to be appreciated for raising those questions, and those questions should remain with you whenever you think about Bengal Renaissance and the difference, the two models of reforms he had mentioned today. And he is absolutely honest on that point. We may disagree on many points, as he had pointed out. We quarrel in his work. I see it as a negotiation. Amiya is an inspiration, and I'm very happy that he has come, and I thank the organization I thank the organization Voices from the Periphery, Ayush, and our student who is part of this university. These people are doing great work. They are in masters, I think. You are the master's students. And they are showing the way for our master's students like Arko and others. They will also contribute in this, and that is how we will have a number of opportunities to negotiate with or deal with or getting into dialogue with scholars, honest historians like Amiya. And I'm very happy today, and I'm keeping all these notes, sir, and I will be discussing with my students who are not unfortunately present today. Thank you very much for being here.
On behalf of the Department of History, Rabindra Bharati University and Voices of Periphery, I thank Professor Amiya P for his mind-blowing lecture. Thank you, sir.